Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Career Diaries by Elemed in person at MedTech Europe's offices. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Oliver.
Thanks for coming in, Elena.
And for those who don't know who you are, take a second to introduce yourself.
I'm the CEO of MedTech Europe. We're the largest MedTech trade association operating at European level. So we represent this industry towards the outside world, whether that's regulators, stakeholders, media, and the like.
And obviously, part of Career Diaries is about taking going through the story of the career of our guests. And, you know, the last time we spoke, you know, you were actually still at MedTech Europe, but in a regulatory focused role. And I'm really excited today to actually learn about, it's been a few years since we had the chance to catch up.
I think it was during COVID, right?
Yeah. So I'm excited to kind of learn about this transition into becoming CEO and actually like how that's changed for you. So talk me through that. What's happened in the last few years for you?
Yeah, so last time we met, we were in the middle of one of those COVID lockdowns. I was leading the regulatory team here, which basically represents the industry's needs towards the outside world on the famous EU MDR and IVDR. And we were trying to deal with all the panic around shortages, trying to basically keep the healthcare systems running. And at that particular point in time, it meant advocating extensions to the IVDR and MDR timelines. Now we're in a brand new era where COVID is behind us. Europe is finding a new place in the world. The industry is recovering to some kind of new normal. And we have a bunch of legislative developments here in Brussels, which enable the regulatory framework and the policy framework more broadly to be modernized and become more internationally competitive. And in that time, I was promoted from regulatory director to CEO of the association after my predecessor retired. And so, yeah, we're entering a new chapter of trying to unlock new opportunities for this industry in Europe.
So I'm really excited to learn a bit more about your vision and your plan for MedTech Europe. But I really want to dive into that transition from regulatory into CEO of running an association, because I guess that was a bit of a culture shock for you.
It was, to be honest. Yeah, it was not something I had on my radar when we last spoke. The industry needs different things at different points in time, right? When MedTech Europe was founded more than 10 years ago, we were in a phase where the IVD and medical devices sectors were represented well by trade associations here in Brussels, but they operated more as partners alongside each other. And one of the instrumental things done by my predecessor was bring them together into one single association called MedTech Europe. So most of the last 5 to 10 years was actually about creating that new association's identity, not just for the members, but also for the staff and for the outside world, putting us on the policy map and getting coherent as one team, one industry with a common voice to the outside world. And just as well, because we lived through some very big challenges like the arrival of the new regulatory framework, the pandemic, etc. Now we're in an era where MedTech Europe is an established player in Brussels since many, many years. And I believe I was chosen at that particular point in time because the board leaders that we had wanted to reorient the organization even more on policy, on external impact, on trying to position the industry as a thought leader in all these debates that are happening around the future of healthcare and the future of industry in Europe. And so I was asked to take on that very exciting challenge and see what we could do to further increase the industry's reputation and representation in Europe. Yeah.
So when you were asked to make this move to CEO of the association, what do you know now about what that role entails versus, like, what misconceptions did you have at the time?
Well, you know, there are some similarities, first of all, between being a department head and then being a CEO. There are major differences, but some of the basic skills that you should have and should optimize as a, say, director, you absolutely need as a CEO. You need to be able to operate at the helicopter level. You need to be able to supervise and motivate and empower people. You need to be able to take a team through a strategic direction. And that means everything from, you know, having vision, having the ability to give feedback, to delegate, etc. And I just thought it would be that on a perhaps more ambitious scale. But what I underestimated mainly are two things. If you're leading an organization, you don't always have the luxury of just being told what is the strategy and fitting your team's activities into it. You're actually expected and you need to co-create with your customers a new strategy and see where the future direction that you want to go is and try and shape that rather than just contribute to it. That's one of the things we've been working on very hard with our elected board of directors, to have a 5-year strategic plan. The other thing I learned a lot about, of course, is how to up my game as a leader. We needed very much to unite the staff and the colleagues here in MedTech Europe around a common sense of purpose, because one of the luxuries, but also ones of the watch-outs in this particular line of work is there's no shortage of things to do. You get things landing on your desk every other day from the European Commission, the European Parliament, the media, and so forth. And it's very easy to just go out there chasing noise because many of these things are relevant to the industry and can add value. But to actually do that in a coordinated fashion where you're sure that your limited resources are going after the most high impact things, that only happens if someone is really looking critically at the big picture and trying to say no to the right things, basically, and doubling down on the things that really matter.
Yeah.
That does not happen by itself.
Yeah, that was actually one of my learnings as well. Like, actually, simplicity and cutting back is actually more important than adding.
Yep.
And it's very easy. Yeah, it's very easy to like add things to your plate, right? Yeah. And actually, the biggest challenge is how do you remove things so that you can really be focused on the things that absolutely matter.
Absolutely.
What are some of the mindset shifts that you personally had to go through when you became CEO of the association?
Yeah. I mean, this particular line of work at the end of the day is about representing a customer, but it's not an individual customer, it's an entire industry.
Yeah.
We don't represent just one manufacturer or 2 or 10. We have a membership of 210 companies and associations, but even beyond them, we are expected to represent the wider industry. And the reality is that the industry in Europe is continually changing.
Yeah.
There is incredible product innovation. There's incredible geopolitical shifts. There's incredible shifts in terms of where companies do their research, their clinical development, where they do their manufacturing, where they do their launches. And so even though I had the privilege of a certain amount of prior industry knowledge from roles in the industry, it's actually a never-ending job to stay as up to date with that as you can. A little bit like how doctors need to continually stay up to date with the practice of medicine and the new techniques which are coming out, and not just rely on what they learned in med school. You actually need to do that too if you want your service offering to remain relevant, not only to the industry of today, but what it might be tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that requires an enormous proactive investment of time. That's an investment of time, of course, which is much easier to make if you're genuinely delighted and interested by the industry. Which I am, and which many of us in the association are.
Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think people think that when you become CEO of an organization, like everything gets fed to you, and you just sort of like orchestrate. But knowing you personally and knowing how you're somebody who's very passionate about what's going on in the industry, and you're immersing yourself on a day-to-day basis to really distill down what's going on. Yeah. You mentioned something, and it did raise a question for me, so I want to challenge you a little bit.
Okay.
So when the regulations came in, there was a lot of conversation around, innovation in Europe, and, there are other markets now that are going to look more attractive. And on the talent side, what we started to see, and what we still see now, are companies deciding that their kind of first path would be to go to the US.
Absolutely.
As opposed to Europe, because of the complexity, notified bodies, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Well, does Europe remain attractive on a global scale?
Europe remains absolutely attractive, but Europe's attractiveness in the world is not to be taken for granted. Okay. It is, I don't want to say it's under threat, but it is under more challenge than ever before for a couple of key reasons. And now we're actually touching on the heart of what our 5-year strategy is.
Yeah.
On the one hand, the complexity of doing business in Europe has gone progressively up in the last 5 to 10 years. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. The CE marking rules, which you and I have talked out about before, definitely got more challenging as a result of the move from the old directives to the regulations. Even if we hadn't had all those transition challenges that we had with notified bodies and COVID, the reality was it was a substantial upgrade of the rulebook, which resulted in increased costs. It resulted in increased time to market. It resulted in at least temporary unpredictability in terms of, what do I have to do to get a positive or negative decision from my regulator? And how long will it really take? Is it really what I thought it would be when I pitched my innovation to the investors, right? And all of that can result in Europe seeming a little bit less of a sure bet than it used to. Yeah. So that happened alongside other policy complications beyond the CE marking. You had new rules coming in on environmental sustainability, on digital health,
Yeah.
on product liability, on data protection, a whole raft of things basically, which also apply to this regulated industry in one way or another. And outside of Europe, other regions of the world were getting their act together to become more competitive.
Right.
Either because their regulator had made a conscious effort to streamline and make more efficient their own regulatory pathway, or just because the market became more attractive.
Yeah.
You go to places like APAC, for example,
Yeah.
which of course is extraordinarily diverse, and they don't have a European Union to bind them all together. But there's still tremendous population growth. There's a tremendously exciting new middle class, which is emerging,
Yeah.
of people who are able to really pay for modern healthcare more than ever before. That results in a massive net increase of that market relative to Europe. So of course, Europe's attractiveness is partly about what's going on in here, but it's also about how that relates to other regions of the world. And all of that sort of resulted in a sequence of things in the last 5 to 10 years, which, does make some companies, or at least some businesses, say, are we really going to go to Europe first? Or for this particular product, does it make sense to come to Europe second or third or fourth? That's the challenge. And that's only something we're going to be able to do something about if we make an intentional effort to make the European environment as attractive as possible while remaining as responsible as possible for patient safety.
So in terms of it's the first time I've heard of MedTech Europe really having a strategic plan in the way that like businesses would, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit more about that. And also, where did the idea come from to even do that?
Yeah, so I mean, a strategic plan is nothing innovative in itself, right?
Yeah,
Pretty much all of our member companies have one. They're not necessarily public documents, but they're partially there also just to give the internal teams and the internal customer base clarity about what the big priorities are.
Yeah.
Like I said, so much noise an organization can go after, but to make sure that you're pausing and making sure that, do I engage in something, yes or no? And do I engage in it big time? Does it align with the big strategic imperatives? If it is, then maybe I can justify that. That was one of the starting points, right? Because we're a very diverse industry, especially on the medical devices side. The needs of the companies can vary tremendously. So just because you try and offer service in an area which is super relevant for 1 or 5 or even 25 companies doesn't mean it's necessarily top tier for the others.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to make sure we reserve as much of our resource as possible on things which benefit everyone. The other thing, of course, is that, as you said, like one of the biggest challenges sometimes is saying no.
Yeah.
There are sometimes in the space of a 5-year period that things will happen that you simply could not predict, and you have to decide pretty quickly. Are we going to pivot and spend energies on these things? Yes or no? Knowing whether it is going to help you with your strategic plan or whether it's important enough to put your plan on hold for 6 months is a really critical step to take. Now, obviously, no one could ignore a COVID-19 pandemic because it fundamentally changed everything. We also couldn't fundamentally ignore all the excitement last year around United States tariffs.
Yes.
That was something that was basically entered the world just after our plan was published. In both cases, we were able to say work on these things is still in line with our mission, which is to make Europe more attractive and make the environment more amenable for the companies operating here. But the plan is necessary for things like that, because tomorrow there could be something else that may or may not align with that. Yeah, so I think those are two very, very critical things to keep in mind. And the other thing is, quite frankly, in the past, we always had priorities, but the priorities only had a 12-month time horizon. And so when you got to the end of a calendar year and you sort of reported to the industry about all you've done together and what you were going to do next year, sometimes the annual priorities resembled fairly suspiciously the priorities of the previous year.
Right.
And we realized that some of the things we work on are very long-term, like the implementation of the MDR and IVDR, like the reform of the MDR and IVDR, which got started late last year. That's not going to be a 12-month exercise, even if some would like it to be. So I just think the 5-year time horizon better match the reality of things. And it's also, by the way, very similar to the timeline of the EU institutions' own priorities as well.
Okay, so you're aligning it as well in that way. So what are the biggest priorities then that fit for you guys?
So there are many, many things which go into Europe being more or less attractive, and not all of them are things that are so relevant for the Brussels level. Some things are very relevant for national or even regional politics, and then there are other things which are massively decided over here. So companies look at a huge variety of things when deciding where to operate and where to launch their innovation. One of them is the regulatory environment, for sure. One of them is the market access environment, the ability to get reimbursed or procured, the pricing and all of that, the level of evidence you need to bring to actually get through that market access part. And that's got very little, if anything, to do with the EU. Also, the availability of talent.
Yes,
Europe has always been historically great for this because you had a big availability of very talented engineers, many centers of excellence, key universities, and that's still the case. But if you look at where the innovation is going, some of the more exciting areas and some of the most rapidly transforming areas have been in the digital space.
Yeah.
So experts on AI and data science are in a particularly high need right now. And the thing is, those people are not only in need by the healthcare sector, right? You have the big tech sector and others all trying to get the best AI and data science talent they can find, and sometimes with far bigger purses than our industry.
Yeah.
And then you've got the fact that that talent may or may not be in Europe, right? Because it's not coming from a tradition of biomedical engineering or that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think to talk about talent, because of course, this is my area of expertise, and we've actually got a team specifically focused on digital within medical device, right? We've noticed that there's a huge gap.
Yeah.
What we see is tech companies going, right, we're going after healthcare, right? And becoming, starting to develop products in that area, but in their heart, they're a tech organization.
Exactly.
They don't understand regulated environments in the same way.
Yeah.
And then you see traditional medical device companies going, oh, we need to do, the CEO's like, we're going to be more digital. We're going to, we need to do more with AI. And so, they're investing in R&D and innovation in how can we make our devices more connected? How can we start to bring data, this huge amount of data that we've got, how can we start to use that better?
Exactly.
And actually what you tend to see on the other side is the medical device companies on a whole don't necessarily have the talent inside that understand agile ways of working and the way that actual digital tech moves. And so it's really a bit of a culture clash, I have to say. And the other thing that for me was really surprising, I don't know if you've heard this before, because people, you go to any of the big conferences and the conversation is always, we're hiring tech people, right? That's what, generally you'll hear in MedTech. If you go and ask a developer, what industry do they want to work in? The two industries that they don't want to work in oftentimes are healthcare and banking, because they're heavily regulated and developers just want to build, right?
Yeah.
So it makes it even more challenging for organizations to get the right talent.
So thank you so much for saying this, because it throws up a whole series of reactions in my brain. First of all, yes, I do hear this. And I also believe it's something you're less likely to hear if your main customer that you're exposed to is, say, just a market access professional or a regulatory professional. I've heard it much more being exposed now to CEOs and business leaders, because this is exactly the kind of thing that keeps them awake at night. In a way, it keeps them awake even worse at night if they're really, really, really successful today, but are terrified that that's all going to disappear tomorrow, right? Because they might not have the talent they need. The other thing is, availability of talent. Is that something the EU can do much about? Maybe, maybe not. A lot of it is due to industrial policy and education policy at national or regional level. So perhaps it's more something for the industry representations at that level to lead on. Nevertheless, we can communicate to those who want to listen about what is needed to make Europe more attractive in the medtech space. And there's a ton of conversation about that right now, even with former big shots like Mario Draghi coming out and talking about European competitiveness, and also just saying, well, if that's a need, and it's not a straightforward one to fill, and even those people who are in the space are not necessarily allured to healthcare or banking, then maybe that's something that we as the organized industry should do something about, to brand the industry as one with overflowing with purpose and a real opportunity to use these controversial new technologies for good. Right?
Yeah. And I think, one of the biggest pulls, even within Elemed, right, we talk about accelerating the availability of healthcare products because healthcare touches everybody. And I love to talk to people and say, when was the moment that it became real for you that you work in the medical device industry? And everybody's got a story. And I truly, I've been in this industry for 13 years. I truly believe that it's an industry that has so much purpose. And it's about being able to get down to that level when you're attracting talent. I digress. I want to continue. I want continue also wanting to ask you a little bit more about the MDR.
Sure.
Lessons learned.
Well, first of all, I have to say, when we say MDR, we mean MDR and IVDR, because the IVD industry is part of our dear membership. And it was always a challenge when implementing these two regulations to remind everyone of that, even the competent authorities who were responsible for it, of course, because the two regulations were negotiated in parallel and implemented in parallel, but always with the IVDs being a kind of afterthought. One of our claims to fame was always being those reminding everyone IVDs matter, IVDs have specificities, they have specificities in the regulatory framework as well. There are loads of lessons learned. I mean, our main task with these regulations, apart from being one of the key stakeholders involved in the original lawmaking process, was to help guide the industry from A to Z when the implementation period came. And that meant, obviously, helping the industry get organized around interpreting the laws, coalescing around common ways of implementation, but obviously doing advocacy, like when we last spoke, when there was a need to put on the table very difficult political asks like reconsidering the timeline or flagging the unworkability of the notified body system at a certain point in time. So it became a mix of technical implementation and political advocacy. One of the biggest lessons I personally learned, and it carries forth to this day, is you almost cannot overstate how critical and valuable public trust is when you're doing these things. Why? First of all, the regulations are inherently about patient safety and about having devices which work as claimed. One of the major reasons the regulations were such a dramatic change compared to the directives was because public trust in devices in particular had been dealt a terrible blow due to the irresponsible actions of one or two very exceptional rogue companies, which tarred the reputation of everyone and required all of us to claw back our reputation as a responsible industry, regardless of whether you had done wrong or not.
And also, can I just point out the fact that actually that was criminal activity.
It was.
Right? So, like, you can't stop people. If someone wakes up and decides to be a criminal, like, no amount of regulation is going to stop that.
It's not. But whether you like it or not, it can affect the reputation of the sector in which you operate.
Of course. And
there's a choice then. Do you sort of stay in your bubble grumbling that everyone's being unfair to you, or do you take concerted action to show that you're as responsible an industry as you claim to be? And so I point that out because when advocating on behalf of the industry, it's really, really essential to be clear and credible and consistent in saying whatever we're asking for, even if it's difficult things, it's never just to put profits before patients. It's in the interest of keeping seamless and timely and fair availability of useful devices and needed innovation to the patients and healthcare systems that rely on them. We're not talking about, right now, for instance, when we reform the MDR and IVDR, about taking a machete to the rules, lowering the standards, making it as business friendly as possible so that untested devices can come to Europe as quickly as possible. Absolutely not. We do want modernization. We do want unnecessary bureaucracy removed. We do want simplification to make Europe more attractive again. But we want that as much as possible while maintaining very high standards of safety and performance. Why? Because we want the CE marking to remain recognized in Europe and globally as a mark of trust. A mark that says if a CE marking is legitimately affixed to a device, then it doesn't matter where in Europe you receive your care. Big country like Germany or a tiny country like Malta, urban area, rural area, doesn't matter. The same essential standards, high standards globally are assured no matter what. That's really, really important after what happened. And so being consistent that was why we were always doing our advocacy, that was the basis for our advocacy, was critical. We are now entering, however, a new period in European politics. For the first time I've ever seen in nearly 20 years in Brussels, there is an open hunger from policymakers to take actions that make the industrial base of Europe more competitive again. It's not really to do with us, it's due to the fate of European industry generally, especially after the energy inflation that hit Europe after COVID. And some of the energy-intensive industries, like the chemicals industry, have shown a marked decline in Europe, which is worrying for everyone else. So there is concerted effort now to our European politicians to sit down with us and others and say what works and what doesn't work when it comes to our efforts to keep you invested in this region of the world. And that opens up a whole new conversation around jobs, growth, SMEs, and investment, which is great. That was lacking before. But at the end of the day, we still need to stick true to our core, which is we're in this business so that patients, physicians, nurses, lab technicians, health institutions can retain access to the tech they need to care for people. And so, yeah, it's a very long answer, but I'm laboring the point because if you try to represent an industry like this just because companies have heartache or companies are in a tough spot at this particular point in time, that's a very short-term outlook, and you need to stay credible for the next 5 to 50 years with the policymakers and the surrounding stakeholders.
So you spoke about sort of making Europe a little bit more attractive as a market, and obviously there's conversation around faster time to market and lowering costs. But then on the other hand, you have this whole conversation around sustainability.
Right.
But sustainability increases costs and it makes it harder for companies, no?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked, because I earlier you asked about the strategic plan and I got into talent, which is not something that's a core part of MedTech Europe's strategic plan because it's not really an EU competence. Part of having the right strategic plan is going after things which are not only needed, but where you can have an impact.
Yeah.
And we are having a different kind of impact to other associations elsewhere in the world. So there are different pillars of the plan. Sustainability is one of them. Sustainability is absolutely one of them. And I think the challenge and great opportunity for Europe is to turn the sustainability agenda, especially the agenda around greener healthcare, into a business opportunity. Companies have been telling us for at least 4 or 5 years now that Europe leads on sustainability, for right or wrong. I think it's for right, personally. Requirements and expectations are being shot at them from all directions. If you're a company bringing MedTech to market, and especially if you do your manufacturing and operations here, you've got requirements coming from the EU legislation, from national legislation. You've got it from tenders. The requirements in tenders sometimes are about your environmental performance. At different points in time, you're getting it from the investment community, and you're getting it even from your own people. Yeah. So it's undeniable that upping your game in this area and being up to snuff, if not a leader, is critical for your own business survival, in addition to it being the right thing to do. The challenge is, as you just correctly alluded to, cost containment is important in MedTech, because although it's an exciting industry with lots of innovation and investment and that kind of thing, ultimately, healthcare, especially in Europe, tends to be paid for by the public purse. Yeah. So there's strict controls around pricing. You cannot just dramatically explode costs and expect people to pay a price premium for it. And for sure, we are not seeing a great number of cases where hospitals and labs are willing to pay a price premium for greener products. So the question is not, do I do it? The question is, where do I invest my limited energies, my financial and human resources energies, to go after the pieces of the sustainability puzzle which are most needed and which will have the most impact? Is it greening the products? Is it greening the supply chains? Is it doing my reporting better? Is it the social aspect? What is it that the world wants? What is it that the world needs? The last thing I want to do is sink all of my energies into one piece of the puzzle, which turns out to have the least impact. And that's one of the reasons why, in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group, we had a project on this, which culminated last year at our MedTech Forum. It's a report that was published called Decarbonizing Healthcare: How a Competitive Medical Technology Industry Contributes. And this is not a policy paper, right? This is basically the fruits of a lot of research and interviewing of industry leaders about the kinds of actions they can take today, the kinds of actions they can take next year, and the kinds of actions they should take in 5 years when the science is ready to invest the right energies at the right times. And that's intended at a minimum to guide individual companies through their sustainability journey so they can make the case to their boards of directors and to their CEOs. It's not about whether we're in, it's like, are we organizing ourselves in the right way to have the best impact? And there is also opportunity, I think, in there for collaboration with the healthcare system so that companies not only green their own operations, but try and find partnerships they can have with the downstream supply chain, with the hospitals, etc., so that it's not just about greening devices or greening device companies, it's actually greening the delivery of healthcare, which actually most of the carbon emissions can be.
Very interesting. So I'm conscious that you're wanted by your members, and so we've run out of time again.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to have to do another episode.
Let's
part
not
3.
wait 5 years for the next
Yeah,
one.
that's true. Yeah. But I like to ask everybody the big question, which is, what is the legacy that you personally want to leave on the world?
Oh wow. Okay. That's a big one to finish with. Okay, so if you're talking about this job, this is the greatest job I've ever had so far in my career. There's an incredible sense of purpose, an incredible amount of impact we can have. At the same time, I never said I was going to do this forever. So there will come a time where I have to say, have I had the impact I want to have? And for me, it's all about, just as my predecessor did, getting the organization in the industry in the best possible shape for what comes next. Mm-hmm. Our strategic plan has an outlook for the rest of the decade. It's all about making Europe as attractive as possible for this industry to do business. And not just to do that, to make sure that the world actually then knows about it. Mm-hmm. And that some of this negative sentiment about Europe, which may have been valid at one point in time, is counteracted and people know that Europe is worth investing in like before. I also want to make sure I leave behind an organization and an industry which is far more connected with the outside world than ever before. It's very easy in a place like Brussels to do a lot of really valuable work and no one really to know who you are, quite frankly. It takes conscious effort to have an industry and an association on people's roadmap. And so what does that mean in practice? It means the value of medical technology being far less esoteric in the mind of an everyday citizen. I want people to know, as well as they know about the value of food or pharmaceuticals, about why it's a critical part of the healthcare system. I want us to be visibly working far more closely than ever before with other industry partners, both in MedTech and outside, and of course with the stakeholder community, be they labs, doctors, patients, and the like. Because the more I have worked in the sector, the more I have realized that the business of healthcare is actually a single team effort. But we don't always treat it like that way unless we make the conscious effort to do so. And some of the biggest and most impactful things we have done since I've been at MedTech Europe have actually come not by working in our own ivory tower, but by partnering up with the healthcare stakeholders and showing the world that it's what we collectively want and what we collectively will insist on, because that's what European patients need. So if I can leave behind an organization and industry which is far more connected and embedded than ever before with the fellow members of that wider healthcare team, I think it will be the best possible shape for whoever comes next.
Thank you, Oliver. This has been really, really interesting.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
All right. See you next time.